Engine 1 from car 1. Car 1's on scene. If you've been command, give me a C.A.N report.
Welcome, everyone, to the C.A.N report. I'm here with Tim Griswold. We're at the Northeastern Fire Summit that is sponsored by the New England Fools. And I have a good friend, Tim Griswold, that is my guest for this evening. It is now almost 4:30. We had some great presenters at the Northeastern Fire Summit. We've had some amazing guests come in.
It's been a great weekend.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic weekend. Tim Griswold, I've known him for a couple of years. I've been trying to get you on the show for a while. You've just been super busy.
Yep.
But you are a wealth of knowledge. You have many years of experience in the fire service. You definitely have a killer mustache, much better than mine. So I've been wanting to get you on here and talk about your experience in the fire service, the knowledge you have, the trainings you go to. And for everybody else out there who doesn't know who Tim Griswold is, why don't you go ahead and explain yourself?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Connecticut, where I lived till I was 10, and actually a fifth-generation firefighter. So my dad was a volunteer firefighter in Connecticut. When I was born, I actually went to the firehouse before I went home, and then I just kind of grew up in that firehouse. My grandfather was also a volunteer firefighter. He was a farmer and an excavator as his full-time job, but he was a volunteer firefighter in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, where there are 3 generations of my family. My great-great-grandfather was a founding member. My great-grandfather was a chief, and then my grandfather was actually part of the first truck company that they had there. So I spent a lot of time with my grandfather when I was a kid. They lived like right around the corner from us when I grew up. So I remember him taking a lot of pride in being a truck guy, telling me how they were always the first in, the last out. And then I just kind of grew up with my dad, and both my uncles were on the fire department. So that's just that was where I grew up a lot. That was like the family social life, was whether it was, going to drill night with my dad, they had a softball team. So we spent a lot of time watching their softball games, picnics. It was a pretty family oriented department. So just growing up, I spent a ton of time there. And then back in those days, it wasn't as probably taboo as it is now to go on calls. I think I watched my first pin job when I was like 5 from the backseat of his car. So that was kind of like, a core memory from my childhood. Then when I was about 10, we moved north to New Hampshire. My dad did electrical sales, and the company he worked for was moving north. So we moved north to New Hampshire. That's where my mom's side of the family was from. So it was kind of an easy move. Plus, to just get out of Connecticut seemed like the right choice for everyone was making. So I came up here when I was about 10. My dad kind of took a break from the fire service for a little bit. And then I was like 14. I remember reading in the newspaper an ad for the New Hampshire Fire Explorer Academy.
Okay.
Back like the original rendition of it, the one that you've kind of resurrected now. And I was super interested. It was going to happen like the first week of June, just after I was going to be old enough. Like I wasn't even involved in an Explorer post at that point, but I signed up to go to the academy, which was an awesome experience. So I showed up. I remember being kind of nervous. I didn't know anyone, and they had us split into groups, and there was like an adult captain of the group, and then, lieutenants that were, other explorers. And it was, just a great experience. Like my first captain, at the Explorer Academy was Andy Byron.
Wow.
So you can't really ask for a better introduction to the fire service.
Yeah.
Super passionate, obviously. And then it was funny because I just actually reconnected with one of the lieutenants in my group, Dr. Andy Cartier, who was a Candia Fire Explorer at the time. And now he's one of my ER docs up in Laconia. So that was the introduction to my fire service career. Shortly after that experience, I joined the Explorer Post in Plastow, New Hampshire. And then I went to a regional high school that had 4 towns. So I lived in Danville. The Explorer Post was in Plastow. And the deal at the time was kind of like, as soon as you turned 16, if you were involved in the Explorer Post, you could join the fire department. So I joined the fire department. I remember I rode my bike to the station because I didn't have my license yet. The chief at the time was like a super old timer. So he handed me a pager, says, when this goes off, you come back. And that's what I did. And it's just been kind of, all in ever since then. So I did that through high school. I went through the Explorer Academy all 4 years I was in high school. I was actually the first group to actually get a certification out of it. So back then they had Firefighter 1 was split into A and B. So I got my Firefighter 1A through the Explorer Academy, which was pretty cool. And then after I graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to be a firefighter. So I remember going into my guidance counselor's office and I was like, I need to either go to community college, because at that time the Lakes Region Tech had a great program for an associate's degree. So I was like, I'm going to community college, or I'm going to join the military, because I knew the civil service system gave you extra points for that. So those are my two paths. And my guidance counselor looked at me and he said, nope, you're way too smart for that. You need to go to a 4-year college. And I was like, well, I think that's kind of a waste, because I just want to be a fireman. I don't really need that. And he's like, nope, that's what you need to do. If you do that, you'll get hired anywhere you want and borrow as much money as you can. So that's what I did. So I ended up down at University of New Haven. I got 2 bachelor's degrees there, one in fire science administration and one in fire and arson investigation. I would come home on the weekends to still volunteer with the fire department. I graduated from there, and when I graduated from there, I got a job doing fire investigations in the private industry, which was a cool experience. I really liked doing that, doing the investigation part of it. I didn't really like dealing with the business side of it, so that lasted about 2.5 years. I got out of that, and I still wanted to pursue being a career firefighter. At that time, it was super competitive, though, so you couldn't really just walk into a place. So I got a job doing private EMS down in Lowell, which was, I got a ton of patient contacts, ton of experience down there. I did that for about 2 years, started paramedic school, and then, I was about halfway through paramedic school, and I got hired my first full-time job. At the time, I had moved out of Danville. I was living over in Kittery, Maine. I joined the fire department there, where I was there for like 1.5 years before I got hired full-time. And it was just long enough to go to a pretty significant submarine fire, which was a cool experience.
That's a whole different animal right there, man.
Yeah. So then I got hired full-time, and when I got hired full-time, I was in paramedic school, so I wasn't doing a ton of other training. Once I finished paramedic school, I kind of dove headfirst into the fire training side, and that kind of took off for me. I think one of the first classes I went to was nozzle forward, and then after that, it was just kind of a deep dive. I was looking for training, any training I could. I ended up going down to Pennsylvania to the Art of Firemanship days, doing a ton of training. I got involved with the Fools, doing a ton of training.
So you just hit the ground running on everything. It sounds almost like nonstop. You was like, I want to be a firefighter. I want to be completely immersed in it, from a fetus to an adult.
Exactly. I think there was a time when I was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4, where I really wanted to be a trash man.
At 3 or 4 years old, you wanted to be a trash man. Okay.
And that was basically the only time in my life where I deviated from the plan.
So you have generational blood in you, right? So your dad, firefighter, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, and you have a brother as well.
Yep, I have a brother. So my brother is about 4.5 years younger than me. He also got in the fire service pretty young. He was probably 5 when we left Connecticut, so he didn't have as much time down there. But then basically how it happened is once I started getting in the fire service with the Explorers, and I started going out for calls, every time I'd come back, my dad would be like, what was that? And, he was super interested. And finally my mom was like, would you just go with him and join the fire department? So he eventually joined the fire department, and because of his experience down in Connecticut, he was a captain and a training officer. So once he joined up in New Hampshire, he kind of quickly rose in the ranks because of his experience, eventually becoming the deputy chief of where I volunteered. And my brother, as soon as he was old enough, joined the Explorers and then joined the fire department.
So how long have you been a career firefighter for?
So I got hired as a career firefighter in 2012. Worked for the initial organization I worked for 12 years. And then just this last October, well, it was actually September when I officially left the previous organization. And then I went to Laconia and got hired as a firefighter paramedic in Laconia.
You've been there for a while now.
So like 5 months now, yeah.
You obviously love training. You were a previous employee also for the New Hampshire Fire Academy?
Yep. So I worked for the Fire Academy. I started with them shortly after I started as a career firefighter. And I think it was 2013 when I started. And I actually so Russ did the cancer program yesterday. He had initially started that, and he was looking for people to help push it out to other departments. When I started with the organization that I got hired with, there were, I think, 11 or 12 vacancies. And it was a 44-member local. So quite a few vacancies, and 2 of those vacancies were members that had passed from cancer. So I kind of felt almost like this. I always knew I wanted to get into teaching, but I felt this obligation to give back to the fact that 2 of the vacancies I was filling were members that had passed way too early from cancer.
Yeah.
So once Russ had put out the call for additional instructors, I immediately got involved in that and became an instructor with the Fire Academy. And then I was teaching in that program and then got involved with teaching Fire 1 and Fire 2.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I know I had the pleasure working with you at the academy, teaching a couple of classes, and I was always impressed with how knowledgeable you are, and not just knowing the information, because I mean we could all regurgitate textbook, but your practical skills are always top notch. You know,
So
I could tell you really dedicated yourself to the craft, and actually like being a part of the Fools, going to trainings. Like you said, you immediately like immerse yourself into outside training, and you brought it back to New Hampshire.
yeah, I think for me, one of the things that we miss in training as an industry is we teach all these different skills, right? So like you have the hose advancement, the forcible entry, the search, the, ventilation, using the saws, the tools, what have you. And we teach all these skills, but we don't teach how to utilize them. And I think that's the piece that we're missing. And I think it's really no one's fault. It's just our culture has shifted from a time when you would go to the academy, you would learn the skills, and then you would go to the job, and you'd be working with guys that had been there for a number of years that could fill in those gaps of like, all right, you know how to force a door. This is when and why we're going to force a door on the fire ground. Like when I started, I think the other guys on my crew, like my ambulance partner, I think had been there for 6 or 7 years. The next senior guys had been there, 10 or 12. And then like senior guys had been there over 20. So even though I got hired with a big group of people, we were kind of split up among the shifts, and it wasn't all junior guys, and we were coming in with previous experience. Nowadays, it's not uncommon. Like my experience up in Laconia is there's a lot of guys with under 5 years experience. So you miss that why and when to utilize these skills. So that's what I've always tried to add to at first what I was learning just for myself, and then as I'm teaching, to try and add that to, we're not just going to check the boxes of doing a skill. We're going to learn how to do it properly and why we're doing it that way. And I started with that. So I've always tried to dive into sources of information when I'm learning. So I'm a big reader. I like to read books. And one of the ways I get new books to read is when I read a book, I'll look at the bibliography or the sources cited, and then I'll pick a couple from there. And just kind of, if I like the information that I'm getting, I want to see where they got that information from.
Sure.
Right. So I did that with books. And then when I went to Nozzle Forward with Aaron Fields and his cadre, he has a strong background in grappling sports, wrestling, sambo, those types of things. So to kind of do the same thing I did with the books, I'm like, I want to follow those sources. So I got into training jiu-jitsu. Just at first.
How long have you been doing jiu-jitsu for?
I started in 2017 or 2018. It was around there. So at first I was just trying to figure out body mechanics, position, basically to apply to moving hose lines, because that's.
So the fire service inspired you to pick up a martial art because you want to be able to move hoses better?
Basically, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That's how it started. So as I was doing it, though, I figured out, like, one, the body mechanics I'm learning don't just apply to hose. They apply to search. They apply to forcible entry. They apply to all these different things. Two, it was a great physical workout and a great mental workout. Just grappling with somebody, there's no rest. Like, you go until either you submit them or they submit you or somebody taps out. Whereas if I'm out for a run and I'm getting tired, like, it's pretty easy to slow down. Or
right.
If I'm lifting in the gym and I'm getting tired, it's really easy to just drop off that last set, call it a day. But on the mats, you go until you're done, which I really liked. I like the fact that as a martial art, I could do it basically 100% every day just because it's not a striking art. So you're learning to control people but not hurt them.
Gotcha.
So it's easy to train at a high level frequently. There was also that self-defense aspect, right? Working on the ambulance, doing a lot of mental health behavioral calls. Again, you learn to control people without hurting them. So if I'm on the ambulance, I have more options than just, popping somebody in the face, which obviously isn't appropriate
Right.
or desired on the ambulance.
Did you? I meant to ask that earlier. Did you always want to be a medic? I knew you always wanted to be a firefighter.
So
you always want to be a medic?
I always wanted to be somewhat involved in EMS. I didn't necessarily have the inherent drive to be a paramedic from birth like it was with the fire service. But I was working private EMS down in Lowell. The system that they have down there is they have full BLS ambulances. So it's 2 basics on an ambulance, and then they have medic fly cars based out of the hospital. At the time, there were 2, sometimes 3 fly cars that covered Lowell and a few other communities. Lowell's a pretty busy place.
Yeah.
So there were times when either I would have to call for them and it took them a while to get there, or I had to call for them and they weren't available. So for me, the drive to become a medic was, if I'm working in EMS out on the street, I don't have to call for anyone. I want to be the guy.
That makes sense.
So that was kind of my drive to go to medic school, was just kind of basically the same philosophy on the fire ground. I want to be as good as I can be. And for EMS, that was like as high as I could go. But yeah, kind of back to the jiu-jitsu thing, just the more I did it, I just kept finding more and more benefits. One of the biggest ones I found was the decision making. So as you're grappling with somebody else, you're in this constant OODA loop. So for people that aren't familiar with the OODA loop, you observe, orient, decide, and act. It's developed by John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot and a military strategist for military operations, but it's very applicable to the fire service. It's basically something you use anytime you're in a high-stress dynamic environment to make decisions based on how that environment is changing. It's really hard to create the stress to do that in fire training. There's such a limited availability of live fire training, and then when you do it, you can only make it so realistic before it, you're violating safety standards. So with jiu-jitsu, doing that grappling, you're constantly taking in information, making decisions in a very high stress, kind of hostile environment. So it almost like trains your brain to be comfortable doing that. And you get comfortable being in very uncomfortable situations, especially you're training with people of all sizes. So I've trained with people who are 6 inches taller than me and 200 pounds heavier than me. I've trained with people who are, a foot shorter than me and 100 pounds less than me, and got my ass kicked by both of those people.
Yeah.
So it's just super applicable.
Now, with learning about how to control your mind and body, and I noticed we were kind of joking earlier about your eating habits.
Yeah.
And you're on like a strict diet.
So yeah, it's not.
Is it strict or is it?
I'm not super strict with it, and that's intentional. So I started kind of paying attention to my diet shortly after I had kids. Growing up, kind of all through high school, through college, I was super small. In high school, I was probably like 120 pounds soaking wet. I didn't even grow like height-wise till my senior year of high school. But then even when I grew height-wise, I think I was like 140 pounds in college. And I could eat whatever I wanted. I wouldn't put on weight. It wasn't until my kids were born and my sleep was disrupted that all of a sudden I went from, 140 pounds to a really sloppy 200 pounds. And it got to the point where I'm like, I need to do something to get this under control. So I started a long time ago with the paleo diet, which is, meats, vegetables, nuts. And I felt super good on it. It kind of, I cut some weight. My brain fog kind of improved, but it was super complicated and just got to be a pain in the ass trying to figure out like what was paleo, what wasn't paleo. Like at the time I was still married, so I was also grocery shopping for my ex-wife and my 2 kids, and they obviously didn't want anything to do with eating like that. So it just became really expensive. I can go buy food for me, buy food for them. So I kind of fell off of it. And then more recently, probably about 4 years ago, kind of was getting to that same point physically again, where I'm like, I need to make a change. Started doing for, I think it lasted like a week. And then I ran across somebody who was like, hey, you should try this carnivore diet. So I listened to a couple podcasts, seemed really cool, seemed really easy. All I have to do is eat meat, drink water, and eat salt. I can do that. So I did it pretty strict for probably like 3 or 4 months. I felt amazing, like cut a ton of weight, had a ton of energy, brain fog kind of went away. But then I realized there would be times when, because of the type of work we do, I would get caught on a call and wouldn't have anything to eat. One particular call it was a hazmat call. I got kind of stuck on it all day.
You became hangry.
That's the thing. So on this diet, I used to be super hangry. Like if I missed a meal, I would get hangry. With carnivore, the energy is a lot more sustainable. I wouldn't get hangry, but I would get hungry. So it got to the point where we were like, 6-8 hours into this incident, I hadn't had anything to eat, and they're delivering pizza.
Oh yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, I mean, I might as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm starving. And because I was so strict, like the pizza kind of messed me up. So from then on, I kind of intentionally kept it to like a 70-30, 80-20 split.
Do you carry like a go bag for you now? Like
I carry like some meat sticks, some, some water.
I would explain the meat sticks I saw in your pocket earlier.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, I'm not super strict with it because I want to kind of stay acclimated to be able to eat anything.
Sure.
I know there's some people that are super strict with it and like super disciplined. I also like to eat good food. So,
but with that carnivore diet, you're eating raw meat.
So I do cooked meat. I do raw meat.
Because we had a story earlier, like when I remember working with you at the academy, and it's lunchtime, and I see you just sawing into a piece of raw meat.
Yeah, so I started.
We were all like, "Holy crap, he's eating raw meat!" Yep. But actually, it cut real nice, and it looked pretty tasty. You were eating it perfectly
It's super
fine.
tasty, just a little salt, and yeah, I just cut it up and eat it. Yeah, it's not for everyone. I haven't gotten sick with it. I actually really haven't gotten sick at all. I had a little like respiratory thing a couple weeks ago, and that was the first time I'd gotten sick in probably 10 years.
Wow. That's awesome.
So yeah, it works well for me. It keeps my energy good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So dive into some other things. So you had recently switched departments.
Yep.
You had, for people out there, I think it's always important to talk about our histories and where we came from and being transparent. I talk pretty openly about my experience in the fire service, good stuff and bad stuff.
Yeah.
There's mental health, like Maddie Johnson talking today about mental health, and Paul Cohen was talking about mental health. You had your own struggles as well that you went through in life.
Yeah. So for me, it was, I had some struggles. My life started off pretty good. Like everything was great. I grew up in a nice family. My family was super supportive. We didn't really have anything. Nothing really went wrong. I went to school every day. I got good grades. Never really got in trouble. I followed all the rules. And I followed the model that my parents had kind of laid out for me. Went to college, met a girl in college. After college, moved in together, got married, had kids, had a cat, had a dog. We had everything except the white picket fence. I just followed what I was supposed to do as the quote unquote American dream. Then obviously, I went through a couple different jobs before I landed the full-time firefighter job. And again, everything was going pretty good. And then got to it was 2019. Everything was going well. Obviously I had the typical struggles, financial struggles. I was never really good with my finances. Started to have some problems at home, marital troubles, which came to a head in 2019. Ended up separating from my ex-wife. We split up. Everything was kind of going okay. And then all of a sudden it wasn't okay. So, obviously went through a divorce 2019 into 2020. Everything was, I thought that was I was like, all right, this is the worst thing I'm going to go through. We're going to get divorced, but everything will be all right. Then right kind of in the middle of going through that divorce process, COVID hits. So, as I was married, had kids when I started in the fire service, everyone else I got hired with was single. So like they all kind of bonded. They would go out and, do cool stuff. And I was like, I got to go home, wife and kids. So I wasn't necessarily as socially connected with the group of guys I started with as the rest of them. So then I get divorced, start kind of integrating more socially, getting out there, and then COVID hit, and it was like no one can hang out anymore.
Yeah.
During the time, it was like, knowing what we know now, it seems kind of silly, but I remember at the time it was like, it seemed pretty serious, like maybe we shouldn't be around people. So that just added to the struggle, right? So I'm home by myself, like going to work, going home, no one to go home to. The struggles that I went through in my marriage had kind of caused struggles with the rest of my family. So I was kind of at that time isolated from the rest of my family as well. I wasn't talking to my parents. So I was truly going home to no one. So everything just kind of built up. I didn't have anyone to talk to. I'd started seeing a therapist kind of as we were having marital troubles, was seeing a therapist. I think I was on my third therapist at that point. And I had finally found a good one. The first one I went to, everything I told him, he was like, yeah, I don't know why you worry about that. The second therapist I went to, her attitude was kind of like, yeah, that sucks. And just kind of left it at that. Finally found a guy that took a systematic approach to everything. Like he would talk to me about why things were upsetting me, things I could do to kind of cope with those. So it was going really well. Then right around the time right before COVID hit, he had kind of told me like, hey, like, I'm not going to be accepting your insurance anymore. So I was in the middle of trying to figure that out. And then COVID hit and everyone shut down. So it was like, there was no therapist
left you in
anymore.
lurches, and you're starting to get good care, and all of a sudden you're hanging.
Yeah. So now I'm literally just going, working, going home to.
Now, with this time in between dealing with all this, did you ever turn to any, like, did you drink? Were you a drinker at all? Did you start drinking?
Yeah, I've had an interesting journey with alcohol. For me, it was I never felt like I was drinking to numb the pain. Like I wasn't the type to like go home from a shift and start drinking in the morning. I never felt like I needed to have a drink. But what I would do is I would let shit build up in my head. And then kind of like my one night a month to go out was after the union meeting every month. So I would let shit build up and I'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to get hammered. And then I can say whatever I want. And it's just, I'll be, Tim got drunk again and went on a rant. And that's what I would do. And that was my outlet. So I would kind of use alcohol to shut off my filter so I could let all the shit out in the form of whatever.
Because you're kind of, I wouldn't say introvert is the best way I can describe it, because you're not loud, right?
No,
you're not going to go up.
I'm the type of person, I'll say something if I think it's important, but I'm not going to just make conversation with people.
Right.
That's never really been my.
Before we really met each other, I have always known that you walk the room, and I can see you around, but you're not like, like me. Like, I'm out, I'm like, hey, I'm Mike Goldstein. How you doing?
Yeah.
You're Tim Griswold, but you're like, people know who you are, but you don't go approaching people. You're not that extrovert.
Yeah, no, I've never been like the life of the party type guy. I kind of, I'll observe the room, like you said. I'll, if I have something important to add, I'll add it, but I'm not going to go out of my way to say what I have to say.
So then when you're doing now, you said like now the alcohol is going to make you feel at ease, and now you can be that person instead of watching, you're actually inserting yourself into the conversation.
Which is kind of how I drank a lot in college, and that it was kind of the same thing. I would use it as a social tool to, back then there wasn't really a lot of bad shit going on in my head, but it was more say whatever I wanted to say in a fun way, like if I wanted to talk to a girl or talk to somebody that I wouldn't normally talk to, I'd just get hammered and then I could do whatever I wanted.
So you were now starting to do this after union meetings?
Yeah. So now I was starting to do it, after union meetings. We did a lot of charitable events where I used to work. So, every time something like that happened, it would be intense. Right around, I think one of the lowest points around that time, I was at, I think just I'd been separated. I hadn't been divorced yet, but it was like, it was pretty fresh. And Lieutenant Menard passed in Worcester, and we were all going down to his funeral. I remember going into a gas station next to a firehouse at 6:30 in the morning, bought a 6-pack and 3 40s in my Class A uniform. And that was how I dealt with that. You know, obviously not very respectful of the lieutenant who passed, but I was going through a shit time. And that was, we've all been to firemen funerals, kind of, we toast in their honor, but for me, it was like excessive. Kind of went through that, never really got myself into trouble. It was kind of, working as a good outlet. Sometimes it would get a little out of hand. I'd have to, make some apologies the next day. But yeah, wasn't super bad. So I'm kind of going through these struggles, divorce at home, COVID happening. Same time, I was in the middle of a promotional process. So, went through the promotional process, came out second. Chief called, congratulations, you're second. Kind of didn't really know other feedback, right? So I'd never really gotten any feedback working there, except basically positive feedback. I think I'd gotten spoken to once because I put an extra loop in the hose line and hose load. And I was like, all right, cool. I won't do that again. But other than that, I'd never been written up, never been disciplined. So the guy that came out number 1 filled the immediate vacancy. I sat on the list for about a year. Again, no feedback of, hey, like, you're number 1 on the list. This is what you need to improve. But I just thought it was status quo. So about a year later, one of the lieutenants got a chief's job. So I was leaving. My captain pulled me into the office. He was like, hey, like, nothing's official yet, but I hear this guy's leaving, so there's going to be a vacancy. Congratulations. Like, I'm so happy for you. So I'm like, oh, cool. Like, so I'm kind of like, things are starting to look up, right? Divorced, COVID's here. Like, COVID was kind of starting to clear up a little bit, but I'm like, all right, cool. Like, things are starting to look up. Finally, like, everything that I've worked for is going to come to fruition, and I'm going to get promoted and, have a little more control of my day. And we're going to, be in charge of a fire company. We'll train all day. Things will be great. So, fast forward like a month or two, that lieutenant leaves to go do his chief's position. I still haven't heard anything. And I remember, I'm standing in the kitchen one morning. The chief comes. He's like, hey, come to my office. So I'm like, oh, great. This is finally happening. So go to his office. He's like, yeah, I'm not promoting you. And I was like, kind of, just awestruck. Like, I didn't really even have anything to say because it wasn't the fact that I wasn't getting promoted.
It was the way it was presented.
People go through promotional processes all the time and don't get promoted, get passed over. Personalities don't match, whatever. But like, it was a situation where I had worked. The chief at the time I'd worked for, he was my captain when I got hired. I'd worked for him 7 years. Never, really gave me any feedback like, hey, you need to improve. You need to, do better in this area or that area. So I was kind of awestruck. And then, so he's like, nope, I'm not promoting you. I'd like for you to withdraw from the process. And basically the other guy who was also on the list told him the same thing. Gave us both like these reasons that didn't make sense. So it ended up turning into a union issue, into an arbitration. The union leader was like, oh no, you guys are good. Like, we'll fight this. You'll win. Everything will be good. Well, it didn't go that way. So I was kind of, got over the whole promotional aspect, but through that process, they had given me some concerns. So I was basically, okay, like, how do I improve the concerns that you had? And no one would tell me. They were just like, it's been arbitrated. It's done. Move on. And I was like,
So you're going through this process with minimal explanation, and you're kind of just left in the dark to figure out what is it that you might have done.
Yeah,
right?
and that was really what ate at me for, the rest of my career there. It wasn't the fact that I didn't get promoted. Whether I got promoted or not, I still got paid to ride around in fire trucks. Like, that's the dream, right? So I just wanted to know, obviously the concerns they had were big enough where, like, this was the same department that told me they had no money to help me out with training, no money to give me a day off to go to training. Yet they all of a sudden were concerned so much that they had enough money to hold a vacancy for 9 months.
Yeah.
So it just, none of it made sense in my head. And that just ate at me. It kind of made me bitter. It made me question everything about the organization. Like, it didn't seem to make sense. And
you're a top performer. Like, we talk about that, right? You have people that, just kind of there, they're just kind of slugs, and they just slide on through and do their thing. And then you have people that love to train, love to know the job in and out. They live it, they breathe it. They're the go-getters. They're the ones that are making sure the rigs are top notch, doing all the things that we talk about in the fire service. And then all of a sudden there's this issue with minimal explanation to one of your top performers.
Yeah, that was what bothered me the most, was just there was no explanation and no support after that, because all I wanted to do was improve. Like, it wasn't the fact, we went through the process of fighting the decision, and that went how it went, and I accepted that. For me, I still always want to be better. So if you have a concern, let's work together and make us both better. And it just didn't seem like anyone was interested in that, which was frustrating. So I kind of, eventually just kind of settled into a point where I would just show up, do my job, and go home. I would still go to trainings. I kind of shifted my passion to teaching at the fire academy, and I would just kind of get satisfaction from that. And then when I was on shift, it was just kind of like, whatever, I'll show up, do basically the bare minimum, and then I'll go home. And it wasn't fulfilling at all, which really kind of just ate at my mental health. But it was kind of at the time where mental health was becoming a big thing. It was becoming more and more talked about. But for me, because what I was frustrated with and what was keeping me up at night wasn't the stuff I was seeing on the street, it was the stuff that was happening in the firehouse. And it seemed like at that time, everything that was talked about was like, oh, you see horrible things on the street, you need to talk about it. And I was like, well, those aren't, like, that's not what's bothering
the shit that's inside this house is bothering me.
That's not what's bothering me, so I must not have a problem. And then everyone I would talk to about the problems that I was having was like, why are you always complaining?
So it's funny. You and I story is a lot alike, and that's why I really wanted to talk with you about this, because as I've ventured into this new adventure here, I've spoken to more people who've had those same issues where, again, organizational betrayal. And I got the opportunity to talk to Tracy McCart, and she works with Christine Edwards. They have a program, or they have a group called the Firewives Club, and they came up with a great article about organizational betrayal. And I read it, I was like, holy crap, that's me. Like, I'm struggling not from the calls that I'm seeing, I'm struggling from the turmoil that has been brought upon me, and no one is helping me with this. Like, my administration is not seeing, I have a problem with what they've done to me, but I'm the villain, I'm the victim. And yeah, you don't have a problem, just get over it. And literally for me, that was what I was so upset with, was when I would talk to my administration, my previous department, literally said to me, Mike, you need to get over it. You can stay mad at me all you want. Don't punish anybody else for it, but you need to get over it. How are you supposed to get over something when somebody tells you who the person has wronged you to get over it?
Yeah. So that was kind of my internal struggle, is, it seemed like all the resources out there were geared towards calls we had seen, which for me, it wasn't that the calls didn't affect me, but the calls didn't affect me that the way people were talking about it in the same way. So like, for me, I thought, like, if I'm having a mental health problem, I'm going to be having nightmares about the stuff that I've seen. I'm going to be not able to sleep because of the stuff that I've seen. The bad calls that I've seen didn't necessarily bother me. They changed my perspective on the world a lot.
Yeah.
So like, for me, what I've noticed is seeing all these calls. And like I said, I saw like my first extrication when I was 5. So obviously that shaped my view of the world, and it kind of raised that bar to like things that I thought were emergencies. So like, a lot of the things that, being in a relationship with somebody and they think is a big deal, I just kind of blew it off, because I'm like, no, like, this is my level of big deal and you're like way down here. Obviously that caused some interpersonal issues, but going back to the firehouse, it was like, there wasn't anyone talking about it at the time. So I just kind of like, I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'm just, a complainer. Like I was trying to figure out ways to fit in. So like I even went as far as I was always the guy, like I would be training, even if I was out in the parking lot doing hose drills by myself, like off the hydrant. And, you know, occasionally the guys would come down and, join, ask me questions about what I was doing. Sometimes it'd be guys that, they'd be washing their truck and, you know, doing clamp slides with the garden hose, like fucking making fun of me. And, which, it didn't bother me, like whatever got them off. Like I was cool with that. But I was trying to,
Your problems.
see if maybe I could figure out ways to fit in so that maybe the rest of the crew would kind of hear my side of it a little more, because in that organization I had a lot of people that I respected on the individual level. Like there were a lot of talented people that worked there. There's talented people that still work there. It was more of a cultural problem than an individual problem. So I wanted to like somehow figure out a way to connect with these people so that maybe I could at least get them to see my side of it, if not kind of raise the level of performance. So like I went as far as to like I went out and bought a PlayStation. So that the big thing at the time was like we play Call of Duty. So I'm like, all right, well, I'll go buy a PlayStation. And it didn't really,
Was it
do anything
because now, because we talked about like how you were kind of introvert, right? Did that play into that at all now because you were angry?
So yeah,
you were starting to do stuff like, because when I was going through my struggles, I was literally doing the same thing. I'd go out in the bay and I'd wash the truck by myself. I'd go and throw ladders by myself. I would work out in the bay, but because I see them sitting around not doing anything, like, well, fuck it, they're not gonna do anything. I'm gonna go do something, and I'm hoping that they would go, hey, where did Mike go?
Yeah,
and they would follow me to the bay, and then they'd start working with me.
So for me, it was like when I, not necessarily when I first started my career, but once I kind of got comfortable in my career, maybe like the 3 or 4 year mark, and I really started to notice that like I'm doing all this training, no one else is doing this training. I was kind of a dick about it sometimes, like I would be like, kind of shitting on the other guys for not doing training, probably burn some bridges in that aspect, which like I'd take full ownership now. Like, I was young and immature. I was super passionate. I couldn't, growing up in the fire service and having it be the only thing I've ever wanted to do, I couldn't see that for somebody else, it was just a job. And, they were a landscaper or a builder and they became a fireman because they needed insurance. Like I couldn't see that. And obviously I don't condone that, but there's a way that you can respect that person's position and maybe in a tactful way get them to come out and train for 15 minutes. Maybe they're not going to go travel across the country to go to a conference with you, but if you approach it the right way, you might at least get them to watch, do a technique.
You're 100% right. Like you could try guilt tripping them, and you could try almost shaming them for not wanting to, hone their skills and, appreciate the craft and everything we call it. And, not everyone's human. So not everyone has the same interests as we do. And some people do treat it like, this is my job. I come in and do my job. And then at the end of my shift, I go home and I'm somebody different. I don't need to live and breathe it. I've done my work. I've done my thing, and that's it. And like you said, like it's a big learning thing, because when you've grown up to be so passionate about something that you spend a considerable amount of time, energy, and money to make yourself this performer and this top performer and learn these skills, you kind of become resentful because nobody else appreciates the skills that you've acquired, nor do they appreciate the fact that they should be doing the same.
Yeah, it definitely became a situation where I was resentful. I was angry. There were a lot of emotions that I dealt with that I wasn't prepared to deal with. I just kind of assumed when I got hired as a firefighter that everyone else was there for the same reason I was there. And everyone else wanted to go to a fire every day, and everyone else wanted to train every day and like going on calls. And then when I got there and people were like, I hope you don't do anything today. I hope it's a quiet night. I hope it, all the things that you see in a firehouse. I was just kind of like feel it was, you were in a group of people, but you felt so alone. And for me, that was hard. And then especially kind of when I got to the point where like I'm going through the divorce, I'm going through COVID, I'm trying to wrap my head around, not getting promoted, even though I felt like I checked all the boxes that, they said I needed to check, so then I kind of got past that. COVID kind of cleared up, moved on from the promotion, and things kind of got to a point where I was like, all right, they're not great, but I can deal with this. And then over the course of my last couple of years, things started to happen. A couple other people got promoted. We started going to, we had a few incidents. I didn't feel like they went as well as they could, to a point where like I would voice my concerns and basically be like, you're just mad because you didn't get promoted. So it got really frustrating, and frustration kind of just kept building. I would get kind of more frustrated to the point where like it got pretty bad. Like my mind started going to places that I didn't want it to go. And it was kind of like for the last, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years I was there, it was kind of a wave where like I would get into a bad spot. I would kind of be like, all right, like things are looking up. And then it would just kind of like every time the downturn went down, it would go down even further. But I still kept up. I was teaching at the fire academy. I was going to Fools training, and, I still hadn't really gotten back into therapy after COVID. And I came up to this conference. I forget what year it was, but Rick George and Lee Forshner did a presentation. And Lee has a great story if you've ever listened to some of the podcasts that he's been on, and Rick as well. They gave a great presentation, and it like moved me to be like, all right, I got to get myself out of this hole. So I started really seriously searching for a therapist that could get me in, and finally found one. And I was with her for a couple years until, again, that she moved practices, the insurance thing. But that kind of, got me through another couple years. Then there were a couple calls where, like I said before, like the calls didn't really affect me. And then it got to the point where they did. And I really think it's because I had gotten so worn down and beaten mentally that I had no more capacity. Like Dina Ellie talks about the bucket getting full. Like my bucket was full, and I didn't have a spigot. I didn't have anything my outlet was to train. Like when I went on a bad call and it didn't go well, I wanted to train to make it go well. And the organization I was with just didn't support that, and their solution to things not going well was paperwork, which to me doesn't, like, discipline is supposed to change behavior. To me, that doesn't change behavior. Training changes behavior.
Sure.
So, we had a couple fatal accidents, and it got to a point where both the trauma I was seeing was affecting me as well as the organizational stuff. It got to a point, it was December of 23, I believe. Yeah, December of 2023. I had, tried to make verbal complaints, tried to go through administration, tried to go through the union, was told, well, we can't do anything if you don't put it into writing. So I was like, all right. So I sat down, wrote up all my concerns, which I felt were legitimate safety concerns. Said that because of these safety concerns, I didn't feel safe at work. I was driving down to get a tattoo, which is one of the things I found to help me cope with my mental health. And I get an email from the fire chief saying, you've been put on administrative leave. You cannot return until you get a psychological evaluation. So they took the fact that I said I didn't feel safe at work and it was a 4-page document where I documented the safety concerns that I had, which were operational in nature. And their solution was, you said you didn't feel safe, you need a psych eval. So I was out of work for a month. Again, didn't really use alcohol to drown my sorrows, but I think it was like the day after that email, I went to an event. The charitable association had brewed a beer that we released. It happened to be a really strong beer, and I had a lot. And, I said some things that weren't really received well. At that point, nothing really became of it. I made some, apologies. Was out of work for, like I said, a month, which was literally the worst thing that could happen to me at that time. Right. All I wanted to do was go back to work and train to get better. Yeah. Like that's what I needed. And I think that's part of the problem that many organizations have is they take a one-size-fits-all approach to help, right? So different people obviously are going to need different things for help.
Yeah.
Me, I need to, like, if I have a concern, I want to do work. Like,
Yeah, I get that, because
it,
you're removing somebody
like,
from something that they love. It'd be like if you love to ride horses, but said, "Hey, I have a safety concern because the barn is falling apart." And like, okay, well, we'll just remove you from the whole issue.
right, that's not
You,
concern, right?
you
It's a fixable
right.
issue. And to
But
me,
you're
that was
taking that love away from you, though, and you can't ride another horse anywhere else because that's the only barn that has
right.
your horse.
And that was what really grated at me was like, these are all fixable issues. And instead of fixing the issues, they kind of turned it back on me and was like, you need this.
So with that going on, how did you get better?
So, obviously I continued going to therapy, which helped. I continued to teach at the fire academy, which helped. I was able to, obviously being out of work, I was able to pick up some extra classes. Continue to go to training. Eventually was able to go back to work after about, I think it was like a month and a half. And I kind of just, through therapy, through kind of just meditation, talking to myself,
Ink therapy.
some ink therapy, I kind of just decided, like, you know what? Like, obviously nothing is going to change. I'm just going to go to work and I'll put all my energy into teaching and the fire academy, which is kind of what I did. It obviously wasn't fulfilling, but it was kind of just like, at that point, leaving wasn't really an option. Through my divorce, I had kind of gotten into a spot financially where I didn't have any room to take a pay cut. I didn't have any room to be out of work for any period of time.
Yeah.
I was like strapped financially, working as much overtime as I can just to cover my expenses. I didn't have anything to cut out. Like, I was living at the time in a school bus. So I didn't have even.
What's the name of the school bus that you were living in?
It was Rika, which means power of the home or power of the wolf.
Nice.
So like I had done everything I could to cut my budget down, and it was still like struggling. So leaving wasn't really a choice. So I kind of went into survival mode. So I go back into. I had to have a meeting, with the union president and the chief when I went back, and probably the most haunting thing that anyone has ever said to me when we're having this meeting to come back to work, the chief, gives me these stipulations and says, I need you to go to, you're mandated to go to therapy. And he looked me in the eye and was like, I don't care if it works. I just need to know you're going. So he literally, he told me he didn't care. He just needed to check the box so that if anything happened, he wasn't liable. Was basically,
dude, it's crazy how our worlds have actually like melded together. Because when I got sat down and I had complaints brought up against me, and the deputy chief sat me down, and I was definitely getting the nervous sweats. And he said, "First off, are you okay?" I'm like, "I don't know, I guess so." And I didn't even know it was being recorded. So he was documenting everything I was saying. He said, "Well, first off, if you need help, here's an emergency action plan. If you need help, you can call them and reach out to them, and they can help you out with things."
Yeah.
It was the most sterile way of approaching somebody, saying, "Hey, are you okay?"
Yeah.
It was the same thing, like that. Your chief saying, "I don't care. I just need to know that you're going, because on paper, I need to make sure that you're doing this."
Yeah.
All about liability.
So I went back to work. They moved me to a different shift. The shift I went to was probably one of the best shifts that I had when I worked there. My captain was awesome. The guys I worked with were awesome. And it was actually starting to become enjoyable to go to work again, which was really good. I was at that time working a ton of overtime, but we were covering in the dispatch center, and I was one of the people that was trained to do that. So the way our overtime worked, because I was working overtime in dispatch, my hours moved on the overtime list, and I wasn't working overtime with any of the other shifts. So it went for about 6 months before I had to have any interaction with any of the other shifts. So then we get to, it was the beginning of May 2024. I had done they were coming through, some organization did a play. I think it's actually happening over your way soon. And they put out a request, anyone want to sit on this mental health panel for this play? And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I'll do that. So I sat on this panel. It was a great performance. I think you'll enjoy it. And then I was on this panel, and I think one person from the fire department came. A bunch of people from dispatch came, because there was also a dispatcher on the panel. But yeah, one person I think came from the fire department. And then
They're talking about being there for your brothers and sisters.
so
right?
yeah, so we did the panel, and then I had kind of gone into it. I had like put it out there, on social media, so I figured people would show up, and I had kind of gone into it with like, yeah, I'll go sit on this panel. There was a brewery right next door, so my plan was like, we'll go there, we'll go to the brewery, like it'll be a great night. Did the panel, ended up talking with somebody for a little bit after the panel, and then I walked out, and there was no one there. I walked back home, which was my bus was kind of just numb. I just basically opened up in front of this crowd of strangers. And then I just kind of felt off for the next like week. I think that was on like a Thursday. So felt off that whole weekend. I did an overtime shift in dispatch that Monday. It was like a 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. That Tuesday, I go in for my regular 24-hour shift. And then I forget if it was overtime or a swap, but following my regular 24, I worked the following day shift on another shift. So on that shift, there was some things that happened that I felt weren't safe. So basically, I told some officers, they were like, yeah, it is what it is. Get over it. Talked to my union president. He was like, you want to put it in writing again? And I was like, well, not really, because of what happened last time. So I kind of felt like I was at a dead end. Like there was nothing else I could do. It was just that was gonna be the way that it was.
So did you make that? Obviously, you tried a while and you put in a lot of effort to try to make a change and to appease your administration. Did you leave voluntarily and try to then say, you know what, I'm not going to win here anymore?
So we'll get to that. So work that day shift after my regular 24, finished up at 5. I actually asked that there was a union meeting that night. Asked somebody to come in early for me. Went next door to the Chinese place. Had a couple Mai Tais. Went back to the union meeting. Went to the union meeting. Went out after the union meeting. I don't even know how much I had to drink, but had everything built up in my head. Got to the point where had enough to drink where I was starting to let it out. Said some things that were super inappropriate. I'm not really going to get into it here, but it was just inappropriate, and we'll leave it at that. The people I was with at the time didn't seem really concerned. We walked out of the bar together. They got in their car. They let me get in my car, drive back to where I had parked my bus. Everything just seemed to have kind of blown over. 2 days later, I go into work and shaving in the morning, get basically called out of the bathroom to go to the chief's office, get told I'm being put on administrative leave. And that was the last time that I worked there. So basically what had happened was the things that I said were basically kind of in reference to the officer in charge of the training that I felt was unsafe. The people that I was with kind of passed what I said back to her. It got kind of blown up into something that it was never meant to be. The words that I said got kind of used in a way that I didn't intend. No one ever asked me about it. No one ever called me the next morning and said, hey, like I had some concerns. Are you okay? Like obviously you're upset. Like none of that. It just got kind of passed on, got passed through administration, got passed to law enforcement, got passed through the court system, and it became a legal process. And it was right then where I'm like, you know what, this is not going well. Like I cannot survive in this environment. It was obviously a super low point for me, but I made that decision right then and there. Obviously I had to take care of the legal stuff first, which didn't really go well for me. Was out of work for pretty much that whole summer. Started applying to other places, which was difficult. I'd been employed there for 12 years and I don't interview well. When I got hired there, they were so short on people that they didn't give me an interview, which was how I got to become a full-time firefighter. So I was super nervous, not interviewing well. Now I have this,
stigma, if you will,
ton of baggage that I have to be transparent with.
And New Hampshire's so small, it carries with.
Oh yeah. It was the people that I told mostly already knew, which is fine. I had nothing to hide. And which is why I was transparent. And the only reason why I'm not getting into details now is because it's not really the forum to do so.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah,
I just think it's important to really tell the story of your struggle and succeeding.
Yeah. So I was super transparent, went through a couple processes, and they all seemed to be going well. There were a couple where they're like, yeah, you came out number 2. I went through, there was 1 week. I had 3 interviews in 3 days. Got a job offer out of one of them. Got a job offer and went further in the process with a second one, and one I was never told no, but I backed out because I had gotten a pretty solid job offer where they seemed excited to have me. I got sized for gear. I got sized for uniforms. Like, I had a start date. I got an email with the, schedule for drill school. Everything was going great. Went into where I used to work, resigned, and I thought I was good. Like a week later, I get a phone call from the organization that I thought I was going to go work for, basically saying, yep, you went through this psychological evaluation. You didn't meet our standard, and you no longer have a job offer. They wouldn't really tell me what standard I didn't meet. I ended up having to kind of go back and forth between them and the psychologist, just because, again, just like with the promotional process, I'm not going to fight it, but I want to know how to improve as a person. So basically, I met with the psychologist. She's like, yeah, you're introverted. You might come across as intimidating and, not having emotions.
Intelligent people.
Which I basically already knew about myself.
Dude, people who are really, really smart have the hardest times actually being.
So yeah, I was kind of confused, upset, didn't know what to do, because now I was literally without a job. I had 2 kids that I'm required, 1, because I want to provide for them, and 2, legally, because of my divorce, to provide insurance for. I had no savings. Again, I lived in a school bus, so I didn't know what I was going to do. Luckily, my parents were super supportive, kind of helped me get through the next couple months. I started basically immediately applying for jobs again. Got the call from Laconia, went through their process. They had a really good process. It really focused on more so me as a person than me as a fireman, and got the job offer.
I love also is that you still kept striving. You kept going, and you knew you need to work on your mental health, and you continue to do that. But also for the department you're on now, like they're investing in the person. They're not investing in rumors. They're not thinking about hearsay. They are looking at the quality person. Yeah. And also, again, you are a very transparent person. You're blunt to a point, right?
Right, which is, sometimes gets me in trouble, which basically the situation.
But I think that's great, though, is that they know the quality of person you are. They know that Tim Griswold is a dedicated public servant. He loves to do the job. He loves to learn the job, to say, you know what, the hell with the rumors. Let's talk to you.
Yeah. I felt really good with the process. I felt like they were genuinely interested. I was able to, share my story, and then just the whole process, starting with them, we did like a 2-week recruit school. Everybody was super helpful. They're very, throughout the whole organization, everyone has a voice, which I found to be so refreshing, because where I came from, it was very much like expected that unless you're very senior or an officer, you should not have an opinion.
Yeah.
And just fall in line and do what has always been done. Whereas here, like, everyone on the line has a little task that they're responsible for. Everyone, bunch of different people involved in training. Everyone works together to, get the job done. It's pretty short staffed, but they really just make things work.
I love it, man.
Everyone wants to be there, and everyone's super respectful and welcoming. It's been such a great environment. They really have the senior man on every shift has a really solid role and influence on how that shift runs day to day. It's not just the officer barking orders. Everyone rotates positions. So you share that workload. You're not just killing the workload on, as a probationary member, obviously you're responsible for a lot of chores, but I can't remember a time where I haven't started to do chores and it's like, guys, like, let me do some of this, because everyone just jumps in and works together.
That's so cool. I love it, dude. Like, I know we talked about ink therapy.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just as guilty. That's why I get my stuff out. You had the one specific piece that gained a lot of attention when you got it, and it's the neck piece.
Yep.
And you had a lot of meaning behind it. But then it got shared to a certain page,
Yep.
and they ripped you apart. I was pretty pissed about it because, one, I know you personally, and you clearly state why you got that piece, but instead it still got shared onto that social media page, and they said to hell with the reason why he got it, and just ripped you apart because they wanted to call you a hoopy or a whacker because you got your shield and some other kind of meaning on your neck on that piece. And I forgot your meaning behind it. So as we're closing up, I always think that's a really important piece, and it had a lot of meaning. So what was the meaning behind the neck piece?
So, yeah, it has a lot of meaning. Just kind of in general, like the tattoos, I've just found it super like meditative to get tattooed. And then I've always, I mean, you touched on the fact that I'm a little introverted. I've always had trouble kind of putting my thoughts into words sometimes. So for me, like the tattoos is a way of kind of, I mean, I literally have words tattooed on me. So it's kind of a way of putting my thoughts and my beliefs into words. Plus just when you're getting that tattoo, you kind of go into a special place. I feel like that, has just been super helpful. But as far as the neck piece, so I didn't start getting tattoos that long ago. A lot of people think I've had tattoos forever.
No, I watched you.
It was actually
you really just started.
2021 was the first tattoo I got on my forearm here. Got my second tattoo on this forearm, and then I walked into my tattoo artist studio for my third tattoo, and I was like, I want this shield and I want it on my neck. And my tattoo artist is great. She's like, well, I really don't typically tattoo necks, unless someone has like sleeves or hand tattoos, because like
job killers.
It's kind of a commitment. It's a job killer. She's like, I need you to like really make sure like your policy allows for it. And so I was like, all right, let's do sleeves. And so I got, full sleeves. I got my chest done. I was basically like, I would go in every month or two and get tattooed for, I don't know, probably, I guess it was like 3 or 4 years. So then finally, I finished up with my chest. I go in for the next one. I'm like, all right, it's time for the neck. And she's like, oh, well, I guess you're, committed. So we did the neck tattoo. And for me, it's, for those who don't know or haven't seen the picture, it's my shield from where I used to work with my badge number from there. And the special thing about that is the badge numbers from there are individual. So once you pass probation, you get assigned a badge number. It's numerical order from the first permanent member until current, and they're not reissued. So no one else is going to have this badge number there unless they change the policy. But anyways, has the name of the organization, fireman, on it, and then the word stay dangerous. So for me, the word fireman is kind of special to me. I know there's a lot of debate on the word. There's people that are offended by it. There are people that are like, no, you should, it's firefighter. For me, it's not. It's fireman. And I think, in the day and age when people can pick their pronouns, which I have full respect for, I should have the right to call myself what I want. And for me, fireman means that I've dedicated my life to this. It's, I think it speaks more to the humanity of the job. To me, it's a 1-syllable word, fireman. It has no gender associated with it. It just happens to be that in the English language, the root word man is part of human. But to me, fireman speaks to the person that you are. And for me, I've dedicated my entire life to being a fireman. Firefighter is a great job description, but doing martial arts, I can win or lose. I don't want to fight when I'm going into a fire. I'm just going to control that fire, and I want to win every time. I'm also going to have compassion. I'm going to serve my community. I'm going to care. I'm going to care for my brothers. I'm going to care for the citizens I protect. And that's the meaning behind that word to me. It has nothing to do with man, woman, boy, girl, firefighter, anything that you want to associate with it. That's what it means to me. And there's been a lot of debate, like the firemanship conference has taken a lot of flack for using the word. And if someone's truly offended by me calling them that, then I'll call them whatever they want. But
Sure.
for me, that's what I prefer. And then as far as the stay dangerous, to me, like that's just staying effective. You know, a lot of people use the term like stay safe, you know, when they
Sure.
have a good shift, stay safe. Our job isn't safe. And I can't find it. I mean, I've tried to look for it a number of times, but there was this great speech by a military, I believe it was a general or somebody high in rank, giving a speech to a military unit who was going off to war. And he was kind of making the same reference. Like, I'm not going to tell you to stay safe. I want you to go do dangerous things effectively and come back home. And to me, like, that's what this means is stay dangerous. We're going to go out and we're going to do dangerous things. I want to do them effectively and competently. To me, like safety comes from being competent. Kind of like I have this shirt from Stash Vault, Safety First. It's an acronym and I hate acronyms, but you know, search and find everyone. That's
Well, I'm glad you don't hate the title of my show.
But anyways, like that's what it means to me. And as far as the, you know, Facebook page that I made it on, I'm not on the page. And like I said, that last part of my career, I had a great crew. The junior person on my crew, she texted me one day and it was just this, you know, long text like, oh, I think you're a great person. I think you're a great fireman. Like kind of just like pumping me up like randomly on some like Tuesday morning.
Right, because she saw the post.
She had seen the post and I hadn't. So I'm just like, okay, thanks, I guess. And didn't really know what it was even in reference to. And then my captain like texted me and was like, hey, like just wanted to make sure you're okay. And eventually I started asking, I'm like, why? Like, did something happen? And, you know, I figured it out. And if people want to do stuff like that, and that's what makes them happy during their day, like it's an internet post. It's not, it doesn't harm me at all. It doesn't hurt my feelings. Not everyone is going to like you. There's a lot of people that I have respect for that seem to like me, and I'm cool with that.
I like it.
You know, and there's people that don't like me, and I'm cool with that too. You know, I've seen a quote that I like that says, you know, don't get upset over the opinions of people you'd never go to for advice. And
I love that quote. Dude.
That's kind of where I'm at is, you know, and a bunch of people have come up to me and was like, oh, you know, I defended you. And I'm like, you know, if that's what makes you happy, then good. But for me, like, if you want to post it on the internet, post it on the internet. I have social media because I like to stay in contact with people throughout the country and I like to learn from it. All those posts like that, like that's spam in my opinion. Like I don't care if it's about me. Like if someone I respect has an issue with an opinion I have or something I'm teaching or something I said, they're going to come to me and they're going to have a private conversation with me about it. You know, they're not going to post on the internet. And if they do, like, I don't have much respect for that because I've always been very much of you criticize people in private, you praise them in public. So if someone has something that they're critical of me and you're going to make mistakes. And I've had plenty of private conversations with people where they've been like, hey man, like I didn't agree with this. And okay, let's talk about it. But as far as like posting stuff on the internet, go for it.
Well, that's a great way to look at it, man. I think it's fantastic. And just, you know, people like we talked about before, there's just snippets in people's lives. They don't really know everything that's going on. It's like you're what you have going on. There's a meaning behind what you have put on your skin, and that carries a lot of weight. And it's a lot of, obviously it's disrespectful for when you posting something without knowing the whole story. I love the way your outtake on it is. I think that is very mature and out of the box thinking of not getting pissed off about opinions that people you don't know and go to advice for. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, they could be great guys. I don't know. Yeah. From what I hear, like they do a ton of fundraising. I know
they're great people. Yeah. And that's why I'm not naming names, like, but I think it's important I think it's super important that people understand that again, that it's probably better to ask why you got something or what's going on in your life so you can actually get some answers before posting and shitting all over somebody.
One thing I did want to hit on is, so obviously a big part of my story was changing departments after 12 years, right? And you changed departments after a while. So I know you know the struggle. And for probably the last like 5 years I was there, I kind of felt stuck, like I touched on, like I didn't feel like I could change. And there were certain people that kind of showed me that it was okay to make that change. You were one of them. You know, obviously making a change later in your career, you know, it's not easy. You're older, you're more established, it's hard. John Spira from Fit to Fight Fire, I know he made a change late in his career.
Yeah.
And then Brian Abbott, I don't know if you know of him.
I don't think so.
So he's from Ohio. He has a powerful story. I met Brian in Pennsylvania at the Art of Firemanship Days, and he's an amazing human being. He has, like I said, a super powerful story, and he also made a change kind of later in his career. So I just want to state how much I appreciate, you guys kind of setting that example and kind of showing me like, hey, like it's possible. There's light on the other side. Because for a long time, like every time, I thought about leaving, everyone was like, oh, the grass isn't always greener. Everyone has their issues, kind of just making me feel more and more stuck. And I think there's people that have showed the grass is greener. And it's not necessarily that one organization is better than the other, but some organizations are just a better fit. The place that I used to work was a fun place to work. Like I said, there's a lot of talented guys there. They have a strong union. They have a strong charitable association. It was just a really difficult place for me and how I like to operate at work. And the place I found has been amazing.
That's awesome.
I'm really thankful for that opportunity, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to have you on here. Love the story. It's such a great message. And again, a lot of people have come up to me and saying that they've dealt with the same issues. And that's why, again, it was so important to have you on here.
Yeah, I really don't think it to light. I mean, Chief Rhodes had a great speech at FDIC a year or two ago about it. Dina Ali has touched on it. So I think it's kind of coming around, that organizational culture, how much of an impact that has.
Organizational betrayal, workplace PTSD, it's a real thing. And it's not the calls that screw us up. It's how you're treated when you come back from that call that can really mess people up. We need to talk about it more, because that's honestly, I feel like sometimes with our suicide rate going up, that's a big issue with some of our suicide rate, is that the workplace is causing that. It's not the calls, but if you treat your employees like crap when they get back from a call.
It takes away your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for me, the people that I've known to die of suicide wasn't necessarily because they're sad. They felt that they had no purpose anymore. I think we're such purpose-driven individuals in this line of work. Once you take away your purpose, what else do you have left? That's why, like when I got sent home from work, it's like, that's literally the worst thing that could have happened for my mental health. Like, that's where I needed to be, like to send me home, and home to really
stare at the walls.
Nothing.
Yeah. I appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. This was a really good episode to have. I hope you guys listen to this. I hope all of you get something out of this. It's important to talk about this. Again, there is reading material. The Firewives Club, they talk about it. Dina Ali, I'm an open book. Tim Griswold's an open book. There's a lot of people that want to get their stories out to let them know that there is the other side. The grass can be greener if you look for it. Thank you so much for tuning in to the C.A.N Report. You guys be dangerously. And I'll also tell you to be safe. Love you all. Nozzle top.